perseverance was a big thing for me coming out of that harvest after working 84-hour weeks, being physically drained, emotionally drained, mentally drained, and still wanting to make wine, still wanting to be a winemaker. It was kind of that aha moment of this is the career for me.
Despite it being grueling, you still loved it. And what was it about winemaking that you just loved?
I'm a type of person that has always thrived under pressure. Every harvest, it's a high pressure point in production. You have a limited time to bring in the fruit, and then you have to make very quick decisions. These are decisions that you're going to have to live with for the next 12 to 24 or longer months as you're working with that wine and getting it prepared to go to bottle. Every harvest is going to be different. So I think that's exciting. You can prepare as much as you want, but things are never going to go the way they were planned.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 160. Are you curious about how a wine brand breaks through in a new market? Why is the wine category one of the most difficult to offer a great price-quality ratio? And what unique challenges do women winemakers face in the industry? You'll hear those stories and more during our chat with Beth Liston, a rebel winemaker from California who's just launched a new wine called Longshot. Now, on a personal note before we dive into the show, so many of you have emailed me to say that you're actually interested in the journey from book baby to publishing my new wine memoir, so I'm going to give you a little update each week. Not interested? Then fast forward a couple minutes. No idea what I'm talking about? You'll find a link to a new running blog post I'm calling Diary of a Book Launch in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/160. I'm going to take you behind the scenes in the making of a book, from writing and editing it to selling it to a publisher and ultimately to launching it in the marketplace. I'll share with you the emotional highs and lows, as there have been many of those already. I'm sure more to come. Memoir is such a personal piece of writing. It's really as naked as you get on the page. As of this podcast, my agent and I are in negotiations with several publishers who are interested in publishing it. How will this end? Down in flames? Up on a bestseller list? I really have no idea, but you'll find out as I do. I'll share a few more terribly, awfully kind rejections from UK editors, aka the literary cloaked version of mean tweets. Last week I talked about how your platform, the audience you bring to the book, is so incredibly important. And I just don't have that in the UK compared to the US and Canada. So here we go. One publisher told my agent, quote, "McLean is a badass. I like her verve and style. That said, I wasn't sure of the best way to position her in the market for this aspect of her career and life journey." End quote. Another said, quote, "Natalie relays her tale of devastation and betrayal with a voice that's approachable, funny, and warm. There's a fearlessness about her that's appealing. I'm just not sure how to break it out in a big enough way. These books can be tough even with a notable platform." End quote. And a third, quote, "I love the expose element of Natalie's book and found her to be an incredibly engaging character. However," and blah, 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 end quote. So one more odd thing about memoir. As the author, you're considered a character in your own book, sometimes called the narrator. Memoir shares many techniques with fiction writing, from character and plot development to the narrative arc and climax. One humongous difference, of course, is that memoir needs to be true and based on your own story. That said, I really don't mind being described as a fearless badass, even though I've never, ever felt that way. Maybe it just comes out in my writing. If you want a more intimate insider seat beside me on this journey, please let me know if you'd like to become a beta reader and get a sneak peek at this manuscript. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'd also love to hear from you if you've discovered a fabulous new wine we should all know about, a tip that would help us enjoy wine more, or a question for me that's unrelated to my complete book obsession right now. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact and that blog post, Diary of a Book Launch, the full transcript of our conversation with Beth Liston, a link to her website and where you can buy her wines, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find the live stream of the video version of this conversation on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/160. Okay, on with the show. Beth Liston discovered her interest in wine while she was growing up in California's Central Coast. During college, she worked in a winery tasting room, and that's where she says she developed her fascination with wine, both for its art and science. I'm going to ask her about that. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration with a minor in wine and viticulture from the California Polytechnic University at St. Louis Obispo. And then after graduating, she completed more graduate work focusing on enology. Then after that, she worked in wine sales in Austin, Texas. She's had more than a decade of harvests behind her. She's worked and acquired diverse winemaking experiences from the Lime Coast in South Australia to Napa Valley to where she is today. She's now the director of winemaking for Dark Horse Wines in Modesto in California's Central Coast. And outside of work, she enjoys spending time with her husband, Daniel, their two sons, relaxing with yoga, traveling to new cultures through food and wine. And she joins us in Modesto now. Welcome, Beth. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to join you guys.
Awesome. Let's paint a picture of where you are. Are you in your corporate office or are you joining us from home? Where are you? What's it like?
I'm in my corporate office, so I'm responsible for wines made at a couple different wineries, but this is my home office. So during harvest, obviously, I'm down at the site winery, right, where all of the wines are made. Harvest wrapped up the end of October. And so this is where I spend quite a few of my days a week.
So now you get a bit of a breather because your office must move downstairs quite a bit when harvest is going on.
Definitely, yeah.
And can you see any vines from your windows or what's your view like?
The bottling rooms are outside of my office. Can't quite see the lines themselves. I can see the building, but the vineyards are a little bit further south from where this winery is situated in the Central Valley.
Right. So you're still in the heart of things.
Definitely. Yep.
So before we dive into wine, which is going to be the majority of our conversation, we always love to get to know the person who makes it. You have a fascinating hobby, passion. I'm not sure how you describe it, but you restore vintage cars. Tell us about that.
So when I was 11, my dad asked, would you like a new car when you turn 16, or would you like to buy an old car and we can restore it together? And so obviously I said I wanted to restore a car with him. And so we spent some time going to car shows and deciding what car I wanted. And so we settled on a 1964 and a half Mustang convertible. We bought a car that needed a lot of work. We bought a sandblaster, we bought a compressor. We watched videos, we read manuals, we did almost everything ourselves. So we sandblasted it in the front yard. I'm sure the neighbors must have hated us. We did everything 2 or 3 times because, the first time, this was obviously before YouTube, the first time it was not done correctly. And then we had to do it again. But it was an incredible experience for the two of us to get to do together. So I still have the car. I will not make the same mistake my parents did. We will not be giving a 16-year-old a restored sports car. So we've told our oldest that maybe, when he's 30 or so, he can have it.
After he calms down, no revving to high school or whatever.
Exactly. My husband hasn't even driven it yet. So
that's great. So did you always have a mechanical fascination? Did that lead you to it as well?
I always loved getting my hands dirty, right? I always loved kind of digging and understanding how things worked. And obviously now looking at the career path I've gone down, I think it makes sense, right? I spent a lot of time with my dad growing up. I played travel softball. I was a pitcher. He caught me, right? So we had a lot of hobbies together.
That's fabulous. And is there an aspirational car you'd like to restore?
The car that I've always loved, but is definitely out of reach, would be a 427 Cobra. But I'll just admire them from afar, I
Okay.
think.
Cool. Wow. You are such a well-rounded woman. You're also a certified dimetologist. How did you get that
Oh.
accreditation and what does it mean?
There was a small stretch of time, about a year in between doing wine sales in Austin. I moved back to California. So before I went back to grad school, I ended up in a sales job down in Southern California working at an engagement ring store, and became a certified dermatologist. So lots of learnings around right relationships, things that do and do not work as you're selling engagement rings to couples. It was an interesting year. I was pretty miserable by the end of that year in sales, which I think is good. It definitely forced me to make some decisions. And I think was one of the reasons that I was like, I'm done doing this. I need to go back to grad school. I really want to become a winemaker. So, I had spent, like you had mentioned, I'd spent some time on the Central Coast while I was an undergrad working in tasting rooms. And that was really where I fell in love with the industry. That combination of art and science. I love that, every day had the potential to be different. And that was very exciting to me. And so after I graduated, I wanted to get out of California for a little bit, kind of threw a dart at a map and ended up in Austin doing on-premise sales, which was an incredibly cool job. I had a very large portfolio. I learned a ton.
So you liked wine sales, but not diamond sales.
Correct.
Okay, you're narrowing your field. That's good.
Exactly. But anyway, so then I went back to Cal Poly into a food science program focusing on viticulture and enology. And I was very lucky to get connected to some people from Gallo early on. And so I did a harvest in the research winery in Modesto at Gallo. And then I took about a year and a half off of my grad program. So I did that harvest. I did a harvest, like you mentioned, on the Limestone Coast in South Australia. I did a harvest up at Rutherford Hill in Napa. And then I finished my program.
Okay. And when you were in South Australia, what did you learn there that you now bring to your current winemaking position?
It was a really hard harvest. You kind of touched on what are some of the struggles as a female winemaker. I think especially in the mid 2000s in Australia, the wine industry was very male dominated. Building credibility, I think, is still a challenge in the wine industry as a woman. And so I think that was especially true there. But I think the thing that I really took away was it was a hard harvest. It was a hard harvest mentally, emotionally, physically, just doing a lot of physical work. But I really learned the ins and outs of a cellar, which I think as a winemaker, especially in a bigger winery with a union workforce where you don't necessarily have the opportunity to go out and do the work, having done it before, I think does help you to relate and build credibility, right? Which is so important. I think perseverance was a big thing. And I think for me, coming out of that harvest after working like 84-hour weeks, just being physically drained, emotionally drained, mentally drained, and still wanting to make wine, still wanting to be a winemaker. It was kind of that aha moment of like, this is the career for me, right? This is what I want to do.
Despite it being grueling, you still loved it. And what was it
Exactly.
about winemaking that you just loved? It's exhausting. You're still having all these other issues. What said, oh my God, I love doing this? What was it specifically?
I'm a type of person that has always thrived under pressure. Every harvest, it's a high pressure point in production. You have a limited amount of time to bring in the fruit, and then you have to make very quick decisions. These are decisions that you're going to have to live with for the next 12 to 24 or longer months as you're working with that wine and getting it prepared to go to bottle. You never know what every harvest is going to throw at you, right? Every harvest is going to be different. So I think that's exciting. You don't know what the challenges are. You can prepare as much as you want, but things are never going to go the way they were planned. And so I think having that sense of urgency, being really adaptable, having the opportunity, some days you're in the office and, you're in a lot of meetings, you're writing work orders, you're dealing with spreadsheets, things like that. Other days you're out in the vineyards and you're tasting fruit, you're looking at vineyards. Other days you're in the winery, you're walking tanks, you're tasting your wines, you're making decisions. And so the ability to have, I think that variability is pretty exciting and something that I really love and have always, I think, looked for in a career.
Awesome. And when you first started out in winemaking, was there anything you were nervous about in terms of your career choice?
I think especially going to a big production environment, again, building that credibility, finding your voice.
What does that mean for you, finding your voice? Because that's intriguing for me as a writer. So I can't let that one go.
Yeah, I think creating your style as a winemaker, finding your place in a company without losing your identity, I think can be challenging. And I think I've always tried to just be who I am and not blend in and maybe follow the status quo. But I think that can be hard because it's also kind of scary to be different. I know just even, right, like
Yes, your tattoos.
being a female tattooed winemaker and working for a pretty conservative company, for a long time, I tried to hide them.
Did you have them before you joined Gallo?
I had some before I joined Gallo. And then I think, over the years, obviously I added to them, but I tried to hide them for a while. And then obviously with Longshot, with Dark Horse, they've been used in photographs. And so then it just, right, it's like, this is who I am. Everyone is accepting of that, right? And so I think it's very liberating.
I'd say that's a pretty good brand fit. Yeah. So those who are listening to the podcast can't see us, but you can find the video version of this chat. Do you mind holding up your arms again so we can see what they are and maybe tell us a bit about them? Because they're wonderful.
The two on my forearms are actually for both of my boys. So this is a fox with poppies for my oldest. And then...
Is that a favorite bedtime story or something like that?
We actually almost used Fox as his middle name, but his nursery was full of foxes. And then the lightning bolt on this one, when I was pregnant with our youngest, we asked Cole, our oldest, what do you want to name your brother? And without hesitation, he said Flash. So,
like a superhero.
We've incorporated the lightning bolt into his nursery. And that's what we called him before he was born, not after.
Yeah. That is great. Because I've seen some pictures and you also have them on your upper arms too.
Both my arms,
and what are they? Like what's on, which tattoos there?
I have my first American Bulldog. Her name was Sadie, is on one arm. And then I have a piece, my husband and I have kind of matching pieces. So I have like a nautical compass with roses and a lyric from a song from our wedding.
I love that. And last question on the tattoos. I promise we're going to get back to why, but what drew you to having tattoos in the first place? What is it about tattoos you like?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's another way to express yourself, right? My first piece, my sister is an artist. And so my first piece is a pretty big piece of my back that was a piece of her artwork. So yeah, just another form of artistic expression, right?
Absolutely. And I do think there's a brand fit now that you're with Dark Horse, Longshot, Rebel,
right.
Personal. Yeah, so it's all good. So we should clear up for our listeners who are around the world, but many are in both Canada and the US. In Canada, your wine is known as Longshot, and in the States, it's Dark Horse. So why the difference?
It was a trademark issue. So we weren't able to get the trademark for Dark Horse in Canada. So Canada, it's Longshot. And in the US, in Europe, the UK, and Asian markets as well, it's Dark Horse. Yeah. So same wine, same team of winemakers.
Yeah. And same iconic logo.
Same icon.
I really like it. It's like this sort of, horse, I guess. Or
a horse, yeah.
head. And you can see the wine glass in it. So I'll just hold mine up to the camera so people can see it. Longshot. But that, again, does fit. Dark Horse, take a long shot on a dark horse. I mean, that's kind of the brand story, right? In terms of taking a chance on something that is a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, that was really the idea when the brand first started. It's like the unknown winner, if you will, right? And so the brand concept, when the brand team first came to us and kind of pitched the idea, they called it 24/7. And so it was making a $20 bottle of wine that would sell for $7, which obviously doesn't quite translate. I know in Canada it's a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, we just mark everything up 30% or whatever. Yeah, that's okay. But still the price quality ratio.
Right. The concept was to really over deliver.
And why is that so difficult as a wine brand as opposed to other categories of products? Why is it so difficult to maximize that ratio?
Obviously, you have a lot of invested capital, right, with making wine. You have one window to make your wine. And then, with something that tends to be higher quality, you're not necessarily putting it in bottle immediately, right? And so for the reds and the Chardonnay, we're trying to spend anywhere from 6 to 10 months on oak to get some age, to get some complexity and maturity before going to bottle. Even just when you look at your invested capital, the amount of inventory that you're sitting on prior, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And then I think, of course, trying to produce at scale without losing that quality. And so I think that's one of the things that we really have an edge on, right? We work with a huge network of growers across Central California, right? So most of the grapes that go into Longshot come out of Lodi.
Which is where? Locate it for us?
It's just kind of east of like the San Francisco Bay. There's like a delta right through Lodi. And so there's pretty strong maritime influence, right? So it gets warm during the day, cools down at night, which is really great for maintaining acidity as you're ripening. It's a region that's really known for high quality reds. So Zinfandel is kind of the grape that Lodi is known for, but we're able to get really beautiful Sauvignon Blanc, the Cab, the Pinot Noir, the Merlot, all of the back blenders that we use, Petit Syrah, Terrell de Go, Tanat, things like that. All of that fruit comes out of Lodi. So you're able to get really high quality fruit without necessarily paying like, Napa prices. So that definitely works in our favor. And then, we try to take some different winemaking techniques, things that would traditionally be used at higher end wineries, and apply them at our scale so that we can add some complexity.
And what would be examples of those?
Like with the Cabernet, which I know is up there, right? We do extended maceration, which means that we leave the wine in contact with the skins for anywhere from 25 to 35 days. Normally reds at this price point would maybe spend anywhere from 4 to 7 days on skins, and then you would drink the wine off, you'd press the skins, and you'd finish processing your wine. But we find that we get just really incredible mouth weight. We get great complexity. So instead of just being really bright and fresh, you have the really nice fruit, but you also have a little bit more complexity, better mid-palate weight. And so that's something that we started to do. Gosh, I think maybe in 2017, we did a small amount. And we've continued to increase the production of that. And we find that it's just really increased the quality of the Cabernet.
And does it give it more richness and depth? Like, I always am struggling to define what is complexity, for people who are especially perhaps new to the wine.
Specifically, I feel like it increases the complexity in aromatics. So I think sometimes when wine goes to bottle relatively early, right? This wine isn't spending 2 years in barrel. If you're going to bottle about a year after it was harvested, I find like it increases the complexity of aromatics. So you have not only the fruit, you have the oak aromas, you get some spice. There are many more layers that you get. And then it has a huge impact on the mouth weight as well. Helps to kind of soften the tannins and increase that mid-palate weight.
So Sur Lee, you also do that. Which wines get treated that way? And just tell us what it is for those who might not know.
The Chardonnay spends quite a bit of time on lees. That's a pretty standard practice that's done for the most part in barrel. If you're aging your Chardonnay in barrel, you'll leave kind of the light, fluffy lees. So this would be the yeast after it's done fermenting. And you'll stir that barrel, and that will help those yeast lees to break down, release manoproteins into the wine, which is going to just increase that richness, that creaminess, and that mid-palate weight in the wine.
And like freshly baked bread aromas, it's just can taste
like
so
that
beautiful.
Brioche.
Yes.
Yeah. Something similar to like, if you think about like an aged champagne, right, that spends quite a few years on lees, right? That's the same sort of process that's happening just over an extended period of time. And so we take that practice that's normally done in a barrel and we do it in a tank. So we keep the Chardonnay in contact with lees for almost 10 months. We're mixing it to get those yeast cells to break down and get that just really creamy mouth weight. Like with the Pinot Noir, a couple of years ago, we were trying to drive a little more complexity, a hint of spice and like a violet note, which is very characteristic for Central Coast Pinot Noir here in California, and something that we struggled to get in the Central Valley. And so we actually started to co-crush some Gewürztraminer in with the Pinot Noir, just a couple %. But Gewürz is known for just having really beautiful brown spice, having some rose notes, and has this just lovely viscosity, right? Almost like an oily mouth weight. And so we found that by actually bringing the Gewürz in with the Pinot Noir and crushing them together, fermenting together, that we were able to build a little of that complexity, add just a touch of that floral note and some spice.
That reminds me of the Rhone Valley where they have mostly Syrah and I'll add a touch of Viognier. It's just that little dash, maybe 2%, 1%, something really light.
When you ferment with it versus trying to blend it in later, it's a totally different experience.
More integrated, like the aromas and grapes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do experiments like that too with other grapes. You're blending, is it Cabernet and Dornfelder or something like that?
Dornfelder goes into the Merlot.
Oh, the Merlot. Okay, gotcha. So Dornfelder being a traditional red grape from Germany, Merlot classic everywhere. What does the Dornfelder do for the Merlot?
It's funny, right? So Dornfelder, like you said, a German grape, you would not think that it would grow well in the Central Valley of California. It's pretty warm here. We planted some close to the winery and trying to find a good home for it. And so we co-crush, same thing, just like the Gewürz with the Pinot, we co-crush some of it with the Merlot. And we find that it adds a little bit more structure. I mean, it has incredible color. It was a perfect blend. So same thing, a couple percent. We don't like to ferment it by itself. Dornfelder fermented by itself, I don't think it adds a lot of value. The aromas aren't great. It can almost go a little like meaty. But when you ferment it with the Merlot, I think just that structure and color that it brings to the Merlot at a couple of percent, it was a really nice pairing.
Wow. Yeah, that's very particular. So what kind of inspiration do you get? You've mentioned that you often get inspiration from, say, trends in cocktails or beers. How do you bring that over into winemaking?
A lot of it is just experimenting, looking at what are the trends and flavors. Obviously, cocktails, the liquor industry, the beer industry can innovate so much quicker than the wine industry can. And obviously, the rules that we have to play within are quite a bit stricter as well. But it's more just looking for overarching trends. And it's like, what are people gravitating towards now?
What are the big trends right now that you are seeing? A couple of trends.
Obviously, seltzers are huge. I'm not sure what they're doing in Canada right now.
They're huge here too.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. And so how would you say, oh, I see that. So what could we do in response wine-wise?
Wine-wise, you can start to look at, okay, can we do lower alcohol, lighter bodied, right, wines that are going to play in a similar space? So if someone's looking for, you're going to be at the pool all day and you don't necessarily want to drink a Chardonnay that's 13 or 14% alcohol, can we start to look at doing a lower alcohol version of that? But how can you maintain the wine cues? How can you maintain the aromatic and flavor intensity, right? And so those are some of the things that we're looking at. I think we also tend to take a lot of inspiration from what are really small, like super niche producers doing, right? Because those are the things that aren't necessarily going to scale, but I think are also really interesting. Maybe they're not things that we're going to produce on a large scale, but I think they tend to work well for us as blenders. So a few years ago, I was down on the Central Coast visiting a favorite winery of mine, and they do really beautiful dry Gewürztraminer. So I picked up a few bottles, brought them back to the team. We tasted, and it's like, we have a lot of Gewürz, but at that point in time, we were making all of it sweet. It was just going into a blender for other things. It's like, let's make some dry and see what happens. And we were just in the process of launching the Pinot Grigio, which I believe is maybe in certain parts of Canada. I'm not sure exactly where it's at. But, it's like, let's do a dry Gewürz and see what value it would bring. Let's see what blends it could fit into. And so we made some that year. It was great because it had that spice, it had that floral note, it had that, that really oily texture without the sugar. And it actually found a really nice home in our Sauvignon Blanc. So that's become one of our dominant back blenders in the Sauvignon Blanc. We find that it doesn't necessarily bring a floral note to it, but it does help to pop the thiols and the tropical notes and kind of keep them elevated throughout the year. But it provided a synergistic effect that we didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, I like that term, back blenders. And just for those who don't know what thiols are, what are those?
They're a compound in Sauvignon Blanc that are responsible for like that passion fruit, boxwood, right? Some of those very like New Zealand style aromatics that you expect in Sauvignon Blanc. That's the style that we're going after for the Dark Horse Longshot Sauvignon Blanc. That's what we've been working to build over the years. We actually sent one of our winemakers to New Zealand a few years ago to work with a partner winery over there and to understand some of their practices around solids management and juice and temperature management so that we could bring that back to the winery and just continue to increase the quality and drive that aromatic expression. Obviously, we have a very different climate than New Zealand. It's a very aspirational target, right? To say that you're trying to make New Zealand style Sauvignon Blanc from Central California grapes. But I think we've done a really good job getting there. We have some vineyards that are very expressive in some of those green notes, right? The bell pepper, jalapeno. We have other vineyards that really drive those tropical passion fruit, guava notes. You put them together, and I think you end up with a really nice Sauvignon Blanc.
Awesome. Well, let's taste. All of this is making me thirsty. I have the Pinot, of course.
Perfect. I have it as well.
There we go. How convenient. I love this. I've seen some ads where this is on fire, like it's like the Rebel, literally a branding brand. Now I have what I call my big ass glass for Pinot, because Pinot, of course, is very expressive as compared to a lot of other grapes. So
just like to get a little air in it.
Exactly. So you've got a fairly big glass too.
Yes.
I would love to hear your thoughts. I'll share mine, of course, as well. I've tasted this previously, but when you're tasting this particular Pinot, the Longshot Pinot, which is new to at least Ontario, and it's available elsewhere across the country, but it's just brand new here. What do you get in this on the nose?
The first thing I get is cherry, right? Which is, obviously very characteristic for Pinot Noir.
Yeah, very ripe cherry. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Dark cherry. It's got a wonderful mouthfeel too. Very like liquid silk.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I think that's really what we strive for in Pinot Noir is like those silky tannins. There's some really nice toasted oak, a little hint of cedar, some spice that kind of lingers.
Yeah. How much oak does this wine see?
Almost all of the wine that is in this blend will spend probably about 10 months on a combination, mostly French, but also some American, a combination of chips and staves.
Well, it's almost like a frame around the fruit. I hardly get the oak on the nose.
It's really meant, I think, to support the fruit, right? Add some complexity, a little bit of structure, but definitely not overwhelm. It's being made in a very, I think, traditional California Pinot Noir style, right? Obviously, there are lots of Pinot Noirs that are out these days that are that bigger, richer, bolder, darker style. And this is not that style for Pinot Noir, but it's really trying to drive that really bright, sour cherry, those silky, right? Silky tannins.
Absolutely. It does taste cool climate. It really does have that nervy, edgy acidity, which I love. Pinot's my go-to personal wine when I'm off duty, so to speak, although I can never turn it off. But so I love Pinot because it's wonderful on its own, but it's got such an incredible range of food pairings. I mean, I would put this with roast chicken, holiday turkey, just so much, even grilled salmon.
I think it would be great with duck.
Duck, yes. Duck
like a duck confit with like a blueberry reduction.
Oh yeah, that would be great. It's got really complementary flavors for that. Beautiful mouthfeel. I mean, just all kinds of game birds, even lighter meats like veal would be beautiful.
Oh yeah.
I always think of snacks too. So I'd also pair this maybe with pretzels, not too salty pretzels, but something like that.
A charcuterie board, right? With like some cured meats and cheeses, I think would be really nice. I found that really with all of the Longshot wines, I think they're made in a style that's supposed to be elegant and very food friendly. And I think they're very versatile. When we first launched years ago and I did like a press tour across the East Coast, every city that I was in, we paired the wines with very different cuisines, spicy Chinese food, Italian, Spanish tapas, American food. They paired, I think, so beautifully with all the different styles of food. So you can have fun with those pairings, right? And you don't have to stick with the white wine with poultry and red wine with meat.
Oh, this would be ideal with turkey or chicken. I mean, red wine and white meat for sure. And is there a favorite childhood food you've ever had that you might pair with this one? Or maybe it's another Longshot wine instead?
My mom's side of the family is Italian. And so for us, Christmas Eve, my mom was just here this weekend, one of my son's birthdays. We were planning for Christmas Eve. We make raviolis from scratch. We do like a big salad, with all the antipasta. And I feel like this would be really beautiful to start the meal off to go with like the soup and the antipasta before maybe you get into something a little heavier to go with the red sauce.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that would be great. Maybe bring on the Cabernet after that.
Yeah, there you go.
And are there particular cheeses you think this Pinot would do well with?
I feel like it would do great with maybe something a little more aged versus a soft. I don't know. I would put it with something harder and aged, like a Gouda, like an aged Gouda, something with like some nice kind of crystals, some of that nuttiness in it. I think that would be really nice with it. What would you put it with?
Well, I like the aged Gouda, the nuttiness that can come through because it just would sort of dovetail with the little bit of smokiness, but also the cherry is so bright. It would be so nice with the smoky cheese, actually, or a nutty cheese. I think, they play off each other. Are there any particular sort of odd pairings you've had with this and you thought, oh, this is never going to work, but it did?
I think my favorite odd pairing wasn't necessarily with the Pinot Noir, but it was rosé with fried chicken sandwiches.
Oh, wow.
It was great. I think just like the acidity really cut through like the richness and the fattiness of the fried chicken. Dry rosé is another very, I think, versatile wine.
It is. And I've had dry rosé with ketchup chips, which is a uniquely Canadian phenomenon. And It surprised me. Rosé did work because the ketchup chips, they're not as sweet as ketchup itself, which is really sweet. But anyway, it all worked.
That's so funny.
So, and what would you pair then with your Chardonnay? What is a favorite pairing for that wine?
Chardonnay is so versatile. I mean, obviously you could do it with all the kind of normal things, poultry, I think seafood. I think it has enough structure. You could even do it with like porchetta or something that you would normally put a red wine with. I think with the richness, the fruit, the oak that you have in it, I think that wine could go either direction.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. So Dark Horse performed extremely well. So it's Longshot up here, but Dark Horse performed extremely well in the US market. I mean, out of the gate, pun intended, I guess. I don't know. Sorry. It was a blockbuster success in terms of sales and growth and everything else, growing even faster than the premium wine category, which, how is that defined? Is it like 9 to 50? I guess it would be different between the two countries because of exchange.
In the US, I believe it's under 10.
Okay. Yeah, it would definitely be more up to maybe the $15 range here or something like that. But it hasn't been here long in Ontario, but how is it doing so far? Do you have any early indicators?
Unfortunately, I don't. I don't have visibility to sales data up there, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's all right. You stick to the winemaking, and the marketing folks will stick to the sales. What's the most interesting thing anyone's ever said about a wine that you've made?
Oh gosh. I don't know that I can remember an individual comment, but I think as a winemaker, I think for most of us, the most rewarding aspect of our job is being able to share something that we've poured our like love, our tears, our sweat into with friends and family, right? And to see, how you can enjoy that at a party or over dinner. I think that's when you ask a winemaker, like, what's motivating to you? What's most rewarding? I think that's the most common answer. And it really is true, right? How a bottle of wine can bring people together and how celebratory it can be. And I think that's a pretty incredible feeling, right? To be able to share something like that with the people in your life.
Yeah, seeing their enjoyment of something you actually made. Is there anything in retrospect that you would have done differently in terms of your career?
So I actually started my undergrad at UC Davis. It's funny because I had no exposure to the wine industry at that point in time. I had no interest in it, right? Just no knowledge of it. I was a freshman up there. My roommate was taking a wine tasting class. I was like, why are you taking a wine tasting class? And it's so unfortunate that I was at Davis, right? Like the school in California
for winemaking. Oh, wow.
Winemaking was not on my radar at all. So obviously it would have been great if I had known that was where I should and, wanted to be at that point in my career. It took me a little while to figure it out.
I eventually got there.
Exactly. No, I think really fortunate that I figured out what I wanted to do and that I have something that I love to do. I love coming to work every day, right? I love my job. I love my team. And I don't take that for granted. I realize that's not something that everybody has. So I am very fortunate in that.
Yeah. And you mentioned the challenges that women face in the industry. Are there particular things you do to help younger women, or are you on the lookout for them within the company or the industry? Or
yeah, like I mentioned, I feel like building credibility, that was a really big challenge for me early on in my career. And I still see that as a hurdle and a challenge. It feels like sometimes it takes longer and takes more work to build credibility that maybe male peers are able to build. Seems like much easier. So I have quite a few female winemakers on my team. And so focusing and trying to make sure that like, obviously that everyone has equal opportunities for growth, but also providing them opportunities for that exposure and to build that credibility with our male dominated cross-functional partners, right? So if you look in the cellar, you look at our operations teams, obviously very much male dominated, same thing with the vineyards, right? And so how are there ways that we can make sure that they have the exposure that they need, that they feel confident in their decision making, and just make sure that they're being set up for success and don't feel like things are taking them so much longer to build and to get there. So definitely a focus since I've been a director and trying to make sure that everyone has the resources they need and they don't feel like they're being held back.
Oh, that's great. So just a couple questions as we wrap up. If you could share a bottle with any person in the world, living or dead, who would that be? What wine would you share?
Okay, so I love champagne. If I'm going to drink anything, that is my drink of choice. The year before my husband and I got married, we spent a couple of weeks in Europe and we were in the cellar at Moet and Chandon. And I was like, just leave me here. Like, this is my happy place.
It smells so fresh down there. I've been there
Oh,
too. Oh, it's beautiful smell.
amazing.
Yeah.
So amazing. I think it was a vintage Brut Rosé, right? Their Imperial Rosé I think it's just lovely. Maybe it would be that.
Okay. All right. So you wouldn't share it with anyone. You just drink it yourself.
in the cellar.
Okay. Yes, that's fine. Maybe if you could go back in time, you could talk to Dom Perignon or Veuve Clicquot, which is part of that portfolio.
Yeah.
Some of those famous people. And is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
No, I think we've covered a lot today. Thank you so much for having me, for sharing a glass of wine with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I hope we can do it in person next time, Beth.
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. So people can find your wines in liquor stores, of course, depending on the availability, but it's definitely here in Ontario. It's throughout the States. It's going to be Dark Horse, but up here it's Longshot. And there are a couple different varietals or grapes, depending on where you live. It's exciting to have this wine out. Congratulations on its launch. I'm sure it'll do just as well in Canada as it did in the States. So yeah, cheers. I raise my glass to you. And thank you, Beth, for chatting with us and giving some really great insights behind what makes for a successful brand.
Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate it. All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Beth. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, my MBA brain loves the backstory of how a new wine brand breaks into a new market. There are just so many factors at play, from the product itself, of course. The wine has to be good, and compelling packaging, to getting consumers to try the wine and ultimately building loyalty through repeat purchases. 2, the wine category is one of the most difficult to offer a great price-quality ratio, given the vagaries of weather from year to year. As Beth notes, it's an agricultural product, unlike, say, breakfast cereal, where you can really control most, if not all, the factors of production. It's also capital intensive, from having to age wine, so you're tying up your cash flow, to the substantial investment in equipment from the presses and bottling lines. And finally, I admire her approach to building credibility in the industry as a woman and as a winemaker, regardless of gender. It takes perseverance, a love of change and adaptability, and a willingness to get down in the trenches, or should we say, in the cellar, and learn the job from the ground up. In the show notes, you'll find my email contact and the blog post, Diary of a Book Launch, the full transcript of our conversation with Beth, a link to her website and where you can buy her wines, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find the live stream of the video version of this conversation on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/160. Email me if you have a sip, tip, question, or want to be a beta reader of my new memoir at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when I chat with Tanisha Townsend, who's based in Paris and gives fabulous wine bar tours there in that city. I'm actually chatting with her on her podcast, and she's interviewing me. We have lots of stories and wines to share with you. In the meantime, if you missed episode 53, go back and take a listen. I chat about festive wines with the Globe and Mail's Christine Sismondo. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
The flavor of Franciacorta, again, drives me right to it every single time. I think it's just a really elegant, I don't want to compare it to champagne because I believe that they should be all judged according to their own standards. But of course it is in that direction, in that it's dry. The bubbles are really fine. The flavor is really elegant and perfect. And the Glera grape to me has a little bit of sweetness that I find a little less palatable than the grape mix that's being used for Franciacorta.
And Glera being the grape used for Prosecco. So why is Franciacorta then more expensive? You're alluding to it, but are there some core things that they do making Franciacorta that do add cost to the process?
So as I understand it, not all Prosecco is Charmat method, but the vast majority of it is. So there are some exceptions to that, whereas with the Franciacorta, there is no Charmat being used whatsoever.
If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in the wines we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a Longshot Pinot Noir. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.